As you know, I'm Harvey Asher, sexaholic, and I've been sexually sober 36 years and 11 months, one day at a time. Um, I was thinking this few minutes ago, this has been one of the most exciting years of my life. Turned 81, but since my late 70s, 79, 80, 81, I am learning more things than I thought I could ever learn in a lifetime. This program just seems to accelerate rather than slow down. And it's just the most marvelous experience. I shared with y'all that we're not doing the steps through a very typical way, but through some different doors. So often we're giving the steps 1, 2, 3, and this is what it says, and this is how we do it. And that's not how I'm doing it. We're going in order, but we're not doing it in the classic way. First of all, I wanted to be the big picture. We're so into the details of the steps that we forget the big picture. What is the big picture? Not about lust. It only mentions lust one time in the first step. It's about having a spiritual awakening. And what else is it about, the big picture? We start with step 1, and we say we are without power. The steps and the program is about how we get power back. How can we end up for the rest of our lives not having power about our addiction? We are powerless from this medical, in my opinion, not true or false, but the way I utilize my program based on the doctor's opinion, that we are powerless because of this brain problem we have, a disease that most of us have had since we were children, before we even knew what sex was. We are powerless over our disease, but somehow we get power back not to be powerless over our disease. Unbelievable. And today, we're going to start getting glimpses of getting that power back. And that was just a mistake, I said, getting it back. Getting it, because we never had it. Now, what is the big picture to end up getting a spiritual awakening? What is the big picture that the steps do for us? It helps us deflate our ego, root and branch. Because the ego is what's blocking us from having a spiritual awakening. And in getting the power back. Now you're going to say, how the hell does Harvey say we get power back? Well, it's in the 11th step. Praying only for knowledge of his will and the power to carry it out. The power to carry it out. Fascinating. When we look at the steps as a whole, as just an automatic way that knocks our ego down. Because in last week's talk, we looked at where it said we're now we were at step 3, and then for 3 pages it doesn't mention step 3, and then on 3 pages later it says we are now at step 3. What was in those 3 pages? A description of my ego. A description, 3 pages telling me about how I'm a director and I'm the actor and I'm selfish and self-centered and driven by 100 forms of fear and self-seeking and self-delusion. Self. So what is happening is this process of getting rid of self. Man, how can we get rid of self? What will be left of us if we let go of our mental possessions, ownership, me, mine, my children, my wife, my money, my knowledge, my religion? What happens when we stop owning these things and the ego gets lowered? Well, the smaller the ego, the bigger the God of your understanding. Which means you don't have to believe in God. If your understanding is there's no God, I've known atheists in this program with decades of years. The God of their understanding. I had a sponsor once who's sober over 36 years. The God of his understanding's called love. So he really has a God. He happens to call its name love. So here we're doing this general process. The steps are not separate entities. We're not separate entities. And when you get rid of ego, which we cannot get rid of, but which the steps help us get rid of, we find we are all connected to everything. Just like the steps are all interconnected. Okay, so I said we were going to finish step 3 today, and we were going to start step 4. So what is the best way of doing step 3? The prayer. The step 3 prayer, it says it all. So if you have your books around, let's take it one word at a time. And since we're limited in time, and by the way, I speak for 30 minutes. I leave it open to you all for questions for 30 minutes. We close the meeting, and then I continue for another half hour, 45 minutes for those who want to keep asking questions. I also want to make a disclaimer. This is all my opinions. I don't speak for SA as a whole. This is merely my experience, strength, and hope for staying sober one day at a time. So it says right before the prayer, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. boy, that's a tough word. We were reborn. It takes on such religious connotation. It has such religiosity only for the cultural aspect of it that most of us were brought up with. But what does that mean in our terms? The old me will use again. The old me will act out again. If I don't have a rebirth, not on religious terms, but on the book's terms of the furniture and the spiritual in the appendix in the back, we don't change furniture in our brain. It gets moved to a different place. Same furniture. And as I've explained to you in the past sessions, my character defect was I used to seduce any woman, any man I could seduce for sex. Now, 36 years later, what do? I seduce every man and woman for SA recovery. So it's the same furniture, it's just been shifted to a different room. Before I came in the program, all I wanted to do was talk about sex and be around other sex addicts so I could have sex. 36 years later, all I do is talk about sex and be with other sex addicts. Same furniture, different placement. Because God doesn't, the God of my understanding, whatever that means, doesn't make crap. It was just that my natural instincts, my ego, went wild in a different direction. Okay, so how do we become someone else and remain the same? We were reborn. And it's very simple. It tells us God, and it starts out with the word God. For many people in the beginning, there's too much trauma related to our childhood and religion. And many people rebel against that word. So, as you know, I call it GOD, good orderly direction, or I call it GOD, a group of drunks, or you could call it Allah or Jesus, a Hashem, whatever you want to call it. The many Hindu gods, you could call it anything you want. But my sponsor would always say, Harvey, just picture all the fun God is having with people trying to find a name for it. So it starts with that word God. You do whatever you want with it. But what does it really mean? We were told the previous page, 2 pages. First, we had to know we were not God. The whole answer to having a God is knowing we're not it. How can we have a God if we're still stuck playing actor, scriptwriter, director? And the prayer tells us how to do it. By the way, I do this twice a day. on my knees. The moment I wake up in the morning, I do this prayer because I was told to do it many years, 7 years ago when I got into AA. And I do it right before I go to bed. And I do it before I'm intimate with my wife. I give the act to God. Okay? And what do? What am I saying? I give you me. I offer myself. What does myself mean? I give you myself. It doesn't mean me. It means my damn ego. God, I give you this ego of mine that makes me think I'm you. I offer myself to you, to thee. Let's see. To build with me and to do with me as you will. So my prayer throughout the day is, may thy will be done, not my will. I always add, not my will. My will is so screwed up. If I didn't interfere with some of this, I'd take you out. It's right beyond that window to I'm on the 3rd floor in this apartment, and I have a screened-in porch, and I love plants, small little porch. I have 60 plants. I must have 20 orchids. See, my will is I can't ever get enough. Can't ever get enough. My will. There's never enough when it's outside stuff. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and do with me as you will. What does that mean to me in practical terms? Harvey, don't listen to your thoughts. Your thoughts say, get this over with fast so you could go look for another orchid. That's what my mind wants to do. No. Take away my difficulties. What do you think the word difficulties mean? It means my character defects. We're beginning to get the hint that we cannot make them go away ourselves. That's ego, which we'll learn about in the 4th step. Thinking once I discover my character defect, I could wipe them away. No, the more I try to get rid of them, the more I'm back in ego. So it says, take away my difficulties, my character defects. For what reason? Why? It says it, that victory over them, and I'll put it in English words, may show other people what? It says, bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. This morning I was reading it, never saw it before. What the hell do we mean? How do we know God's way of life? Someone will say it's in the Bible, or it's in the Quran, or it's here, or it's in Torah. Thy way. How about substituting the words, the steps? That's God's way for us. the way of life, to show others that this way of life is spectacular to deal with a life-threatening disease. Life-threatening disease. Especially nowadays, because with COVID, you get it in your head to act out. You're not going to care if the prostitute had a vaccine or not. You're going to do whatever it takes. So watch the first time we're hearing the power. It says, so people could see the power that I'm starting to be able to say, hey, I just had a crazy thought. It's not real. It's not me. I could do something else this moment. I could use an 18-wheeler. You start getting the power to utilize the fellowship. May I do thy will always. Okay. What's God's will for me? I sure didn't know then when I first came in, but I had some simple things I went for that told me in the book what it was. To be happy, joyous, and free. Why do I use that? Because it's one of the few times in the big book it says, we are certain. Wow, they never use the word certain. Or if it is, I don't know many times it's used in the first 164 pages. We are certain God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. That we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready. Most people aren't ready. They don't want to let go of lust. They want to stop acting out, but they don't want to let go of lust. As you notice, that's my constant theme here. We have a disease, but the disease is not an allergy to sex. It can't be. There's so many of us in the program still have sex with our wives. Maybe not at the same frequency, because it might have been part of the addiction, but we know we can't be allergic to sex. Roy, our founder, discovered that because he was having sex with his wife at times. As he also said, during my abstinent periods, which meant he had times of not having sex. So it says we could at last abandon ourselves utterly. So what are we abandoning? The thought that we could control and enjoy lust. Control and enjoy it. Last week I talked about that at age 81, and I won't be here that long, relatively speaking, that the legacy for me in SA was for people to remember that I'd say, it doesn't even have to be that I said it naturally. Hopefully it gets lost in the shuffle, but that the term, we are not bad getting good, we are sick getting well. The other legacy is that this is an allergy to lust, not to sex. The lust comes first, and then the acting out comes. Now, I'm talking about sex in terms of our definition, not in general. No sex with self and no sex outside our marriage. People are going to say that's not fair, this isn't fair, and that's not fair. It might not be fair, okay, for single people. But you know what? You ask a lot of married guys who are active and not anorexic in their marriage. It's very hard for them to be laying in the same bed with their wives and not having sex all the time. So they're working the program too. It's like having a beautiful steak if you're not a vegetarian in front of you all the time. They need to work their program also. But we are allergic to lust. Masturbation especially doesn't come out of nowhere if it's done during the daytime and not in the middle of the night. It does not come out of nowhere. You first get a thought. By the time you're actually masturbating, the endorphins have already gotten you drunk from just the thought I'm going to do it. So it then says, we found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person. It's very interesting. You all didn't put me on the spot, but I was on the spot when you asked about the first step in a group, someone giving their first step in a group. And I wasn't so gung-ho. It wasn't something we necessarily did in the beginning. It's not necessarily in the essay book. But this is different. Getting on your knees in a group or with your sponsor and doing the third step is such a terrific experience if you're not drunk when you're doing it. To get on your knees in front of people and to say, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self so I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties so that victory over them will bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. I'm dyslexic. I don't memorize well. This is the one prayer I have memorized. I did it before the meeting. I got on my knees. I did the third step prayer. And then I said, God, you talk for me if you have something for me to say. As you can tell, I don't sometimes have little notes, but I don't prepare these talks. I get few little ideas of what I don't want to do, few little ideas what I do want to do. And then the following paragraph says, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action the first step of which is a personal housekeeping, which many of us have never attempted, and it tells us it's time to do the fourth step. Now, I want to shock you all, because I'm here to shock you. Why is shock important? To break out of programmed thinking. Bill W. did all his steps in 6 weeks. Dr. Bob was doing his 8th step and 9th step the day after he got sober the second time. Be careful of bullcrap. Be careful. Once you've done your first step, absolutely. Only step that has to be done, absolutely. Everything else cannot be done with perfection. And that's why we have the 10th step. To pick up on what we missed in the beginning. And so how do we do this? We keep it simple. People end up writing biographies. And it's usually about how they have been abused by other people. This is so basic. 3 columns. How much simpler can it get? It's so simple, I couldn't figure it out. With all my education, all my degrees, I couldn't figure that chart out. Some high school kid never went beyond high school in AA had explained it to me. You can't be too dumb to get this program, but you could be too smart. It's so simple. And I tell my sponsees, I have a little special way, but I have them write, God, write this for me. And then I tell them to take a piece of paper and just make 3 columns. That's simple. And on the first page, just write resentments on the top. And then underneath, the names of the people you resent or the institutions. My sponsor was very much into, my original sponsor I talk about all the time, into not putting thousands of people down. You get an overall picture. And you write if it's your mother, your father, and then it's very simple. I am angry at my mother. I'm resentful, top of the page. At, first column, my mother. Second column, what did she do? She stabbed me with a bread knife, and I had to go to the emergency room when I was a teenager. Third column, how does it affect me? And of all things, they tell you what to write. You could pick any of the things they've told you. You could almost be brain dead to do this. It's so simple, people can't get it. Well, how did it affect me? Naturally, it affected my security. It affected my self-esteem. It affected my personal relations and my sex relations. What I thought of women, how I interacted with women. Very simple. Next one, my father. He watched my mother do all these things, never interfered. How did it affect me? Pick some of those words. Now, you could do it with a Hazelden booklet. You could do it with all kinds of booklets. You could do it any way you want. But I suggest you also do what the book says. It can't hurt to do what the book says. Wow, we're way over the 30 minutes. You got a little glimpse of some of the things we'll be doing next week on the 4th step.
Okay, thank you everyone for your service, Harvey and Daniel and everyone else. My question is that I too in the morning get up and do my 3rd step, and at night I say the 3rd step, and sometimes before I'm married with my wife I say the 3rd step. But I feel like a hypocrite, you know, because I'll say this 3rd step, I turn my life over to God's care, and I blow my cool and blow my handle with my wife. That's something small and benign. So I feel like, who am I really kidding here, you know? Is there any value to like say it if I want to do it. I mean, I think it's good, but I don't know. It's like you have to be honest in this program. Who am I kidding here, you know? So just want to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
This is 2 answers. One is, are you sexually sober by our definition? You don't have to answer that. I'm not here to put you on the spot. So if you are not sexually sober by our definition, it's going to be very difficult to not be irritable, restless, and discontented when the drug's wearing down, which is within hours or days of when you act out, and then the endorphins are going down and you're withdrawing. So the irritability, restlessness, and discontent's going to be there. And it's going to be very hard doing the 3rd step when you haven't taken the 1st step. I'm assuming you are sober. But by the way, this is what I shared last week about that person who wasn't sober doing the 4th step. I wished him well, but I don't know how you do it when you're drunk. You know, perhaps it could be done, but I don't get it. If you're sober, then the important thing to do is compare you with you from last month and last year and a few years ago. And you will see how you are jumping on her case less than you used to. We have a tendency to want this program to be magic. Never compare you with someone else in the program. Don't compare your insides with their outsides. Always compare you with you. Prior to the program, a few months ago, whatever. So I had never been physically abusive to my wife. Sexually abusive, yes, with frequency, but not physically abusive. I was sober about 4 years. And one day I got so angry at her, I started shaking her physically. Man, what's going on here? I should be cured within 4 years. Surprise! But I was able to grow from that experience and also do this very special prayer. Thank you, God, for letting me see I'm not cured yet. I haven't done that to her in decades and decades since. I was sober 20 years, and my daughter-in-law, something happened, and I exploded at her, verbally cursed her out. 20 years sobriety. But boy, did I learn a lot about me from that experience. And I went to a therapist too, who I knew, to see what actually happened. This is progress, not perfection, except for the first step. You cannot be a little pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You cannot be a little allergic to penicillin. You're either allergic or you're not allergic. So the first step is the acknowledgement without a doubt that no matter what I do, if I try to control and enjoy lust, this is what's going to happen. Just like a penicillin allergy, you're going to break out with a rash. So it needs to be an absolute. All the others are progress, not perfection. Now, many of you are going to get discouraged from that. You're going to say, what does Harvey mean? Taking the first step? Absolutely. Well, that's why we went over those first 5 paragraphs. We had to be how it works, HOW. Those first 5 paragraphs tell us HOW, how it works. Honesty in that first paragraph, then little on, it talks about letting go of old ideas, which is open-mindedness, which is a reflection that our old ideas that this isn't a disease isn't working. The old idea that I'm bad getting good, rather than the new idea I'm sick getting well. And last but not least, said if you're willing to go to any length, the willingness. Most people aren't willing to go to any length, which sometimes means going to treatment centers or going just meeting after meeting, 3 times a day, whatever it means. Okay, next question.
Okay, so we have a question on the chat and we have a bunch of hands going up already, but I try and go in the order that they come in. How do I receive the wisdom to exactly distinguish between what is in my power and I need the courage to act upon, and what is it only God's power, and I can only pray about it to him?
Our power is a delusion. I can't tell you about God's power. That's experiential. You could experience it, but I don't know how we do words for it. But my power is delusional. And COVID proved it. Everything's changed. All the things we thought we were in control of. Some of us couldn't even go outside our homes. It's a delusion. You cannot control the weather. You certainly can't control your family members. They could pretend like you're controlling it, but you never know what's going on behind closed doors. We certainly can't control our governments. We can't control our religious leaders. What really are you in control of? Getting up in the morning, going to work? Well, if you get the virus, you're not going to be able to get up in the morning and go to work. It's a delusion. Are we in control of our mind? Try getting rid of a lust thought if you're in control of your mind. The more you try to get rid of it, the more it comes in. This is the essence, in many ways, of the steps, to show us through default what's left. When we let go of everything in our belief system, we see that we could control it. Somehow we see the beauty in things we never saw before. Any snowstorm will knock out any of your interest in controlling what you were going to do that day. However, I'd like to turn this back to whoever asked it and let me know some of the things that you think you are in control of. This, I could be mistaken. Is that person still there?
They're here. They might want to type something. I mean, for me personally, I the way I understood it is that it's my reaction. But even, you know, I guess you're saying that even my reaction to things is something that I don't really have any control over. I definitely don't have power over anything, because that's just me answering it. But I can learn to change the programming of my reaction to things.
You could learn to do it, Daniel, but you can't necessarily do it.
No.
You could learn how to do it, but yet we can't do it a lot of times.
Right.
I had an interesting experience. There's a couple we eat with, and I've requested at dinner time he not bring up politics, because I have let go of so much of this, and he keeps doing it. And then he will say to me, but how someone with your smarts, how can you vote for someone like you did, etc. And I'd get all worked up and angry. And he did it 2 days ago, again, after I've asked him not to do it. And I got furious inside me. I got so angry. And this morning, I was reading a book about how happiness is free. And it said, the man said, I had all these women friends, and they really loved me, appreciated me, but it was very short-lived, the happiness feeling. When they would tell me I'm so great and I'm good and they love me. And he said, one day I realized my happiness isn't from them telling me they love me, that's short-lived, but my loving them. The prayer of St. Francis, it's better to give than receive. And this afternoon, I invited them for lunch. And I had one of the best times. And the poor guy lost his hearing aid and it fell and he was all upset. And I tried finding it and he said, no. And finally I found it and he was so appreciative. But you know what? In a few weeks, he'll bring up politics again. But I will never forget that my job isn't to control what he says at lunch. I can even not have lunch with him, but my job is to love him with his different opinions, like I do you all. My God, the differences in couple, I think we had about 244 people or something. The differences we all have is inconceivable. And yet we're one. Based on love. Love and tolerance is our code.
He did have a response. He said, do I control doing the steps or / not actively acting out?
I've never seen anyone control not acting out. Maybe they can, but you don't control it. You let go of saying, I cannot control it. You surrender. I have a disease. I can't control it. And lo and behold, you become willing to ask for help. So when the first thought comes into your head, you could pick up a telephone and share it with someone before it takes you over. I'll only touch myself, but not to orgasm. Ever try that? Control that? I used to say it, I haven't said it in a long time. What so many people in the program, can't talk for the women, but for the guys who will keep touching themselves, get aroused, keep touching himself, not get an orgasm, and say they're sober. And I said over and over, many of you might not remember this term, but there's nothing worse than waterboarding in torture, than having purposeful erections and not having an orgasm. If that isn't self-torture, what is? It's like trying to stop urinating in the middle of the stream once you start.
In the big book, in step 4, at this point, they say we list people, institutions, and principles. And I think principles is the really tough one to, it has been for me. It's hard to explain. It's hard for other people to get. Any thoughts on principle? Like you talked about, don't laugh in the morning or you'll cry at night. And that was like kind of a principle, but really the resentment was probably towards your mom more than the principle. So anyway, any thoughts on how to uncover where I'm pissed off or irritated or feel ripped off by principles?
I'm so glad you brought it up, because my sponsor would say, don't put hundreds of people on, do categories. People, and do some important people, do institutions, and then do principles. Okay? Principles are one of the toughest, because it has to do with religion. And it gets very frightening to look at things without having to leave your religion, but to look at things within our religions that are not working for us who have addictions. Very difficult. Principles are politically is a good one, and religiously. My way is the right way. I've read about it, I've studied about it, I know I'm right. You're wrong. There's this general principle that if I'm right, you have to be wrong. very rare we hear a principle that both sides are right. Very difficult. We have so many different religions here today. And there's a tendency for many religions to say, mine is the chosen religion. And if you don't do it my way, you're going to go in a rough direction. That's a principle we all have, for the most part, not all, but most people. Politically, our concepts of parenting, all kinds of concepts. There's a lovely book. Since this is not I don't speak for SA, I like to also say there's a little book, and it's written by a Jesuit who, it's called The Way to Love, tiny little book. And the whole little tiny book is about the word attachments, how to let go of attachments that we don't even know are attachments. Our brain programming that happened at about at least 2 years old. Before we knew the word me, mine, and I, after about 2, everything's been programmed in to teach us me, mine, and mine, which at about age 2, you begin to be programmed that you're separate from everyone, not connected to everyone. And there's a term for this, and it's called duality versus non-duality. Duality is God is there and I am here. You are there and I am here. Everything's separate. Non-duality for me means if there weren't a worm in the ground to open oxygen for the roots of the fruit tree couldn't grow and give fruit and give out oxygen, which helps me survive. So that worm is as connected to me as anything else. We get a glimpse of this here, how connected we are through our weaknesses. It's hard to get connected through strengths. It's much easier for us to get connected through our weaknesses. So I could tell you how, by 4 years, you should be well enough that you don't get angry at your wife. For 20 years, you don't get angry at your daughter-in-law. No, that's not my way to connect with you. I need to tell you what's in my life today and my weaknesses. And this is an entirely different principle that we learn here. The principle of connecting from our weaknesses rather than from our strengths. Did I bullcrap that one, or did it answer some of the stuff you were asking?
Well, it's kind of like at the end of Felix the Cat cartoons, it says both the end and to be continued. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Harvey.
Why Jason's question is so important is because as you get to the 11th step, in the 11th step, where it says not only prayer, but meditation equally, prayer and meditation, 50-50, you get to mindfulness. And within mindfulness, you can see those principles from your own life. What has been programmed in? Once you see what is programmed in, you then have the freedom of choice to say, yes, I like that program. I'm going to keep it. Or no, I don't like that program. I don't have to do that one today. I'm a grown person. And so I'll give this little story. Many years ago in recovery, my wife and I were traveling to give a conference. And it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I said, Nancy, we were in the airport, let's have ice cream. And she said, Harvey, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. We can't eat ice cream. And I said, honey, we're not children anymore. We can eat ice cream anytime we want. See, it was a program principle when we were young. No, you can't have ice cream in the morning. Ali, I missed you Tuesday. You were missed. Hi. That's not a shame message, it's a love message. Next question.
Go ahead, Guy.
I'll try to turn my video on.
Oh, and after Guy, we need to close, and then we could continue for the next 30 or so minutes.
All right. So thank you, Harvey. Daniel, you spoke about the steps, and it's funny because how you describe doing step 4 is more or less how I did it, even though I was instructed otherwise. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, so I turned to the big book and I just copied. I use the same method as is written in the big book, but it was not what the sponsor told me to do. So I had to do it again. Now, the first time I did it, I was very much into it. I was crying. I was really into the process. But second time, it was not clear what I was supposed to do. And the third time and the fourth time, and eventually I just couldn't do it the right way, the way I was supposed to do it. And this led to the whole thing, like stopping and me just losing the interest to go on and try and complete the fourth step. And eventually, good things happen in the end because of me not completing the job. But I'm just curious, because I will probably have to complete the fourth step soon again, to go it a second time. And what would you advise to me to make it right this time?
Yeah, stop. Since you've already done it, stop calling it a fourth step and continue for your sponsor, but call it a 10th step.
On what
My
step?
sponsor taught me that you only do the fourth step once.
Okay.
You could call it whatever you want, but you're really doing a 10th step, meaning continue here. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So everything's semantics. So you could do the fourth step with your sponsor, but in your own mind, you could think of it as that's how I do my 10th steps with the columns. And we'll get to the fourth column next week. So I'm not ignoring the fourth column, but well, I am this week, but next week we'll get to the fourth column. But it's all semantics.
Okay.
And my sponsors were very different. They were not direct telling me what to do. They would say, it's in the big book, go find it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a tendency nowadays to spoon feed much more.
But there's reason behind it. I mean, it led to good things, right? So.
Well, if you've done the fourth step, you've done
it led to me working a better program, so.
But
okay.
take it one day at a time and be careful that you don't end up in a 10th step resentment towards your sponsor. So do what he says, but if it isn't feeling quite right, to yourself, you could certainly call it a 10th step. And you could say it, hey, I've done the 4th step. I'm going to do it again because you want me to do it a certain way. So you surrender. But you could say, but personally, this is part of my 10th step. Why does sponsorship work? Because it's not what our sponsors tell us. It's that we're willing to surrender to what our sponsors tell us.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a new AA sponsor about when COVID started, and he sends me his gratitude list, his 3 things. He sends me his concerns and fears that day. He sends me his plan called On Awakening. And then he reads something, copies it, and then he writes about it, his take. And he told me to do it. Well, I do 30 gratitudes every morning. He wanted only 3. And so I said to him, but I do 30. You want me to do 3? And I heard myself say it, and I surrendered. And then I was annoyed he didn't pick up the phone enough. I'm used to talking to a sponsor. He does it this way. Well, now after 8-9 months, I am so hooked on doing this. He has me do the same thing, a reading, my contemplation on it. And now a few of my sponsees have asked to do it with me. I didn't tell them, other than a few I suggested, because they weren't contacting me very much. But basically, I needed to surrender to what my sponsor told me. This I asked him, what do you want me to do? If I don't ask my sponsor and he tells me, that's a suggestion. But if I ask my sponsor a question, even when he's wrong, and I know he's wrong, I do it anyway. And I win, because I surrendered. But I'm very careful in asking my sponsor, because I will do whatever he says. So I do not ask my sponsor, should I quit my job? He has no idea about my job. Only what I tell him, which is distorted.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming from my view.
Mm-hmm.
I've also had to learn not to tell my sponsor what happened to me first by saying what the other person did. I first tell him what I did and then tell him the background. Otherwise, I'm manipulating my sponsor, and I'm real good at that. Setting up the play. And if he doesn't even ask me for the background, I don't tell him. I just tell him what I messed up with.
Right.
Hi, Harvey. It's just really late. I have to go. It's almost 11:30. Like we know that with the only first step we have to do perfect way, but other steps not. But in the 5 paragraph we have the health measures. So I mean it's about first step. Health measures allow us nothing, 0, or how should I understand it?
Half measures availed us nothing.
Yeah.
It goes, half measures availed us nothing. In AA, they say, half measures do not give us a half. It gives us 0. So when you have 10 apples and you give away 5, half of them, You have 5 left. In 12-step program, that's not true. It's not a true principle. If you have 10 apples and you give 5 away, you have no apple. You never had apples. It's a different spiritual it's an equation, a spiritual equation. You cannot beat someone up with your fist halfway. And say, oh, I only beat him up halfway. You beat him up. So and in America, we have a wonderful expression. He did it half-assed. That's how we say it. He did it half-assed. It means he's not really doing it. It means it's sloppy. Now, we're not judging it, we're stating it. When it comes to the first step, honesty to self, willingness to let go of old ideas, but the realization you cannot lust a little bit and expect not to get craving. The phenomenon of craving. A severe alcoholic cannot take alcohol like we discussed last week and put it in milk and think he's not going to end up back to where he was.
Thank you, Harvey, and good night.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
By the way, it's a very difficult thing, that first step, because we don't want to confuse it with religion. If you don't do this, you don't do that, you might not be able to go for communion. If you don't go to services twice a day, if in certain religions, God's going to get angry at you. You know, this is not a religious concept. This is an allergy concept. The first step is a medical step. It doesn't mention God. Now, naturally, God's in everything, but it doesn't mention it because it's a disease step. You either are a sexaholic or you're not. If you're a true sexaholic, if you try to control and enjoy lust, which is not talking about your physical body, it's talking about what's in your mind. And we cannot stop the first thought. Jess helped so many people and so many of us. You cannot, absolutely does not mean you're going to stop the first thought. Jess would say the first thought is on God. That's how we're made biologically with addiction. I see an orchid plant, I'll see a vagina and a penis. That's how my mind's made. Lust is what I do with that first thought. Do I nurture it? Do I move it into a motion cinema picture? Or do I immediately go to the essay book for the 18-wheeler where it has 18 suggestions what to do with a trigger? You will never stop seeing triggers. It's impossible. We had a man in Nashville for years who was totally blind. And he would act out. through sound. He'd watch pornography through sounds. Wherever I go, there I am. You can't run away from a trigger. They're going to appear. Now, once I see the trigger, it's what do I do with it? Do I just sit there and get mesmerized? Or do I say, God, whatever it is I'm looking for in that trigger, may I find in you, and somehow turn my chair or walk out of the room? Okay? We stood at a turning point. That's what those first 5 paragraphs say. Every moment of the day, I'm standing at that turning point. But it's an incurable. Okay? So we can't just ignore it.
Next
So
question.
you're either allergic to lust or you're not allergic to lust. If you're not allergic to lust, there's no crime in it, no problem. What's so bad about lust? Noticing a beautiful woman or a beautiful guy or whatever, there's nothing wrong with it. Masturbating, people have been masturbating for thousands of years, no matter what our religions tell us. We're going to get warts, we'll go blind. By the way, I did go blind 12 years ago in one eye. And when I came to the meeting, the guys in Nashville would say, see, it finally caught up to you.
There's a principle.
Yeah. So lust is not a badness we're talking about. Lust is just like alcohol. They even use alcohol in religious services. But I can't drink alcohol. I'm allergic to it. I can drink it, but not successfully. I have an allergy. Most people will not accept the first step, absolutely, that they have an allergy. Physical allergy accompanied by a mental obsession. I'm taking a breath. This, I can't tell you how many times I've said this over 36 years, and hardly anyone believes me. And I watch people, I bet I've watched 3,000 people in Nashville come and go. We have quite a few people with 30 years, with 25 years in Nashville. But let me tell you, most people never accept the disease model. Because of the religious principle, they cannot free themselves of the sin principle. Now, did I do sinful behavior? Yeah, it's bad behavior. I missed the mark. The Hebrew word for sin is an archer's term. The original word for sin, you missed the mark. Yeah, I missed the mark. But it was because I had a disease. And I still miss the mark with anger and jealousy and resentment and greed. But I'm so much better than I was. Not as well as I'll get.
Hey, how's it going? Anthony here. Earlier, you had mentioned about the Hazelton method to step 4. Can you explain that and share how that's helped you or sponsees?
I tried it, that was when I did my steps decades and decades ago. I tried it, but I ended up doing this model, the one from the big book. Many people in the States go to treatment centers. And in the treatment centers, different places might have different ways of doing it. A lot of treatment centers keep you for 30 days and have you do the 4th step while you're there. So the other places aren't wrong ways, but I do it the way the book says. Who's next?
Melissa?
Yes, hi. Sorry about that. I had to step away for a second. Okay, thanks for the conversation. I have a question in regards to my addiction being related to working. Yes, it's an allergy. I have a choice. I haven't worked in multiple years. I'm afraid to work due to sexual harassment and other people lusting on me. So it's twofold. I've caved. I've gotten into the, indiscretions at work, and I'm not quite sure how to reapproach. Obviously, I can't work without having money. So I'm really struggling in that area. And then also if there's any suggestions around how to handle another person lusting after me, saying inappropriate things. I can do my part to pray for the person, say no or walk away. But like, for instance, last week I was followed by somebody at church and he was harassing me. And I'm like, if I can't handle it in a store or at church, how will I be able to go back to work? Would love your thoughts and suggestions. Thanks.
I don't have an answer. People are quite inappropriate. I watch TV and I watch basically only South Korean soap operas because it's a whole different culture and people aren't doing that. I can't even explain it. It's unbelievably positive. And but our culture's loaded with this. I think the first place is the most difficult. Whenever we're pointing a finger, there are always 3 fingers pointing back. You need to go into a deep inventory on how you have harassed other people sexually since you've been a kid. Maybe you haven't, but statistically, we get very uptight. I use the term this, it's happened to me. If you spot it, you got it. So you and your sponsor might just want to work on what is your history of harassment. Your brain might say, I would never do that. Well, we'd have exhibitionists come in to the program and I'd say, oh, I'm glad I'm not an exhibitionist. And then after a year or so, start remembering all the places I exhibited myself. I'm not a voyeur, only he is. Then I, over the years, saw where I was a voyeur. The program is about how to clean up my side of the street. We're never going to change the outside. And it's a problem, Yes, it is real.
Well, thanks, Harvey. And that's something I've definitely been looking at with my sponsor. And I think, perhaps, I don't know, other than I've gained a bunch of weight. I don't wear makeup. I look like a boy. I try not to talk to people and things still happen. So I think there's,
I want to tell you a story, Melissa.
I'm sorry.
I want to tell you the story that there was a woman Nancy and I got very attached to the first year and a half in recovery. And she was going for her PhD. She had no car, and she'd asked us to drive her to the SA meetings. And we were friendly, met at meetings, met at AA meetings. And one day she walked up to me and handed me a letter and said, she was like a co-founder in the SA in Nashville. And she handed me a letter and she said, I'm in love with you. And I know you're in love with me. So I can't talk to you outside of meetings. It shook me up it was one of the more painful experiences in recovery. This gal, if we were left alone on an island and she was the only person there, I might give it some consideration, but I doubt it. This was rough. And I had to say to her, I'm not interested in you. I am not in love with you. Now, a lot of times what happens is we think things that are based on what's happening, but sometimes they're not quite what they are. Over the years, she became, you'll hear the jealousy in me. She became one of our founder, Roy, just really appreciated her and her program and all that, and I'd be a little jealous. But she was around for about 7 years, and it wasn't easy the way she acted. We'd sit at meetings, she'd tell us we had to cross our legs, we couldn't have our legs open in any way. It was not easy. And I was getting so upset at her once, and I went home and I wrote, this goes back like 30 years, 30, 40 years ago. I wrote, if you spot it, you got it list. I wrote every characteristic about her I couldn't stand. And I used them as my characteristics and did an inventory on my own characteristics. This program is not what it looks like. It looks like it's about getting rid of lust. No, it's about getting comfortable so we don't have to default to lust. Because the brain will, because of our damaged brain in many ways, it will automatically default to lust. Now I want to tell you another story, Melissa. My disease, I envy people who are only allergic to half the population. I'm allergic to 100% of the population. And young men, 25, 30, whatever. I didn't talk to young men in the program for at least 2 years. Because I could never truly be honest with my true intentions. was this an aspect of lust? So what would happen is some handsome young guy would come to a meeting and he was really hurting, and he'd say, and I'd say to myself, gee, I know the answer to his problem. I need to tell him. And then I would ask myself, Harvey, if he were 80 years old and messed up and sloppy, would you cross the room and talk to him? I'd have to do tricks to get honest with myself. And if I answered the question, yes, I would, I still brought another member with me, told them what I needed to do, and then immediately left. I timed my conversations with the young men for ages. Now I sponsor people of all ages. It doesn't matter who they are, what age they are. Sponsored one guy from age 21, he's like 26 now. I help him with many of these young people into marriages, and through dating and marriages. But it took me a lot of years to work through some of this. Yes, I have a bad disease, bad meaning it will kill me. And so I'm just sharing with you that this is not easy, Melissa. It's not. And I also want to mention one of the most attractive things to many men are boyish looking women. So don't think you're going to be immune by being a boy. There's some people on the thing shaking.
Great.
So you could dress up with a wig, wear a clown's outfit, and some guy's going to get off on it, especially in our program. So we have to have a good sense of humor. And one of the most attractive women I ever knew, I never knew her, was Bridget Bardot. And man, in her day, she had the most boyish figure except for her front. And that was one of her charms. So maybe you're going to get dressed up less boyish. I'll leave you alone. Just joking, but you never know.
That's quite the context shift. And I appreciate it, actually. Thank you.
Laughter is the main cure for this disease for one day at a time. Okay, we have Brendan left.
Go for it, Brendan. It's that big button on the left. No, you're still muted. Give yourself a moment to breathe into it. There you go. Now we can't hear you.
It's okay. Don't worry. I'll pick it up bit by bit. Sort of get up the volume. Harvey, you spoke about principles and you spoke about religion, and it's an interesting thing. I came into recovery, and I was definitely not going back to the religion of my youth. That was the first thing I said. I said, like, anything but that. And I went with various different variations along the way, and eventually, let's say I did get back to the religion of my youth. The faith tradition, I suppose, I was brought up in. But, I always tried very strongly to, at the start, I'm working with other people, I always say, this is not, like, let's not get mixed up between, like, sort of the program and religion. It's not religion now. At a certain stage in my recovery, now, building a relationship with a higher power, whatever, but I do find that there's times when it's challenging. It's challenging that's the part of religion is challenging. Becoming involved with a higher power related to a religion can stream in a whole load of other stuff, which sometimes can get quite complicated and challenging in itself. And there's times where we talk about a real loving God in this program. And when I look at religion, I'm sort of say, well, can that be a loving God? I just wondered, those challenges between program, religion, because I mean, obviously it's the program which has brought me sobriety.
Yes, Brendan, wonderful question. One of the principles is what we're taught in our religion is the religion. So we take important people who we're with, who have titles, and say that's the principles I either have to accept or reject. What I did for 36 years since I've been in recovery is I've disregarded everything of an angry God, and I found a God in my life called Hashem, who is a loving God. Okay? Now, but it's totally out of range of anything anyone tells me about, because one man said it so clearly in the 1200s. In my religion, it's beyond time and space. Well, what happens is so many people who teach us religion are teaching us about God, who in a time and space category. I had to go study on my own, and I never have stopped on my own. Within every religion, in Muslims, you find it Sufis. In Judaism, Kabbalah has a lot of this. In Catholicism, there's so much they don't talk about the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost. They're very busy talking about the Father and the Son. So it takes my doing, my own letting go of old ideas, but not tossing out the baby with the bathwater. So I have found all these principles of 12-step recovery in my religion, but most people can't see it. You will see it too in your religion, but it's going to be up to you to find it. Because people are not going to give it to us because they weren't given it. So until you read the Anthony DeMello, the Jesuit priest little book and other books, you'll think that all of if it is Catholicism, that all of it's the way you've been taught. Then you read this Jesuit who was born in India, and you see all his other, how he takes the same religion, quotes the same quotes. But that's up to me. I had to let go of old ideas. And there's a man from about the 1200s who's world famous in my religion. And he wrote this book called Duties of the Heart. And he said, no matter who your teacher is, go check out the sources. No matter who it is, check it out yourself. And I learned from that, because I usually say, when I quote from a page, unless I have it in front of me, don't believe what I say, go find it yourself. I make this up in my own image. So this is a fascinating journey. Fascinating. And when the journey in my life got over the past couple of years, it's amazing how all the religions are saying the same thing. It is amazing. I had to learn a lot of this, of all things, even though I'm so far from being that, through Buddhist concepts. And then I was able to find it in my own religion, but I had to first read it from Buddhist places. It's crazy about this journey. And then you see it everything. And I want to end with this, because so many people forget this piece. Many of us in the East know these phrases. Be still and know I am God. The other phrase, the still small voice. This is total 12-step. To bypass my intellect, which means if I'm praying all the time, I can't hear God. I'm too busy talking with prayers. All kinds of concepts that we don't think about. If we're always praying, how do we ever hear? That's letting go of old ideas, not old religions, old ideas about it. Brendan, I could talk to you for hours on this subject, so I'm going to let go, but we are part of a program that gives us this permission. The God of our understanding. God of our understanding, not someone else's understanding. Okay? I talk too much, excuse me, but I get carried away on this topic. It's so close to my heart. And I'm just so grateful. A man in an essay meeting years ago in Manhattan. I'm from Tennessee, and every year I go to see Broadway shows with my wife and go to an essay meeting, and this guy hands me a book this thick called I Am That, this thick. And I said, with a wrapper, and I said, oh my God, why do people give me books? What do I need these books for? I'm not going to read this book. It's so big. I read it and my life changed. Because I have realized I can't get it from the outside. And that's what we're taught here. It's not what we can do. It's what this program is not what we learn. It's what we unlearn. And then what's left is our truth. It's all about unlearning this program. I can't live without sex. I can't live without controlling people. God's going to punish me if I don't do this. God's going to punish me if I don't do that. It's all unlearning to find the God of AA or SA, a loving God manifested in our group conscience. It says it what it is. And how we get to that and what it means to each and every one of us might be very different. But that word love, a loving God, and it says love and tolerance is our code. Everywhere you look, it's the word love, and I'm a love cripple. Man, what a problem to be a love cripple. And that my essence is love. Man. Well, as the ego goes, what's left is the divine, which is love. He breathed into me, spiritus, from the Latin word spirit, spiritual, from the Latin word spiritus, which is the word breath. He breathed into us. It's about being in this moment, the breath staying right here. God is not in the past, only fear is in the past. I mean, in the future. God is not in the past, only resentment's in the past when we go back. God's not in the future, because that's fear. We get frightened. But when we're right here in the moment, we experience it. And we don't even know we're experiencing it. Again, this is not an essay. The meeting was over. I'm giving you books. I'm giving you other things. But this is not essay. This is just my journey that never stops in this program. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I'm letting go of ownership. I don't say my children anymore. They're not my children. That's a principle that's insane. I biologically helped give them life. But my 4 kids are all in their 50s. How can they be my children? They're adults. I have no control over them. My wife, like I own her. No, she is a woman I have chosen to live with and to care about. My children some of them are ones I would pick as friends, some I wouldn't. But then again, letting go of ownership. And how do we apply this to end to our disease? We do it. My body, my good looks, my bad looks, is my genitalia large enough or small enough? Mine, did I do this right? Didn't I do it right? All these possessions and preoccupations that have nothing to do with